on to the main card. Some of you might not have tuned into the early prelims and prelim breakdown. I don't fault you if you're not a heavy UFC fan. I just have that there for those who are interested. But for those who are definitely going to be watching the main card, I'm assuming a lot of my personal friends will be watching, a lot of sports fans in general, because this main card is absolutely stacked. Kudos to Dana White on getting this card to where it is, based on some of the restrictions and some of the barriers that Dana White has come across and other fighters to get to Jacksonville. So I just want to give a quick shout out to everybody involved, people behind the scenes preparing the fight, whether that's filming the fight, setting up the octagon, any of those people involved. Thank you to you. Thanks to the media as well for being able to cover this event so closely. But on to my predictions. Five fights on the main card. First fight is a heavyweight bout between Greg Hardy and Yorgan De Castro. And both of these gentlemen have won in the UFC pretty early on in their career. Yorgan De Castro has had one fight on the Contender Series, which he won via leg kicks and punches, and then has fought Justin Tafa recently, landed a bomb on Justin Tafa. I want to say that was in the first round, and knocked him out. I don't think too many people are going to deny Yorgan De Castro's power. I watched one of his fights against Ross Rutan or something like that. I forget the guy's name. But he was a very tall guy. This was before Yorgan De Castro came into the UFC. Very tall guy. Not only tall, but very long. And Yorgan De Castro did not seem to be fazed by that. You'll have many fighters in the UFC, they don't have that reach advantage, and they're, facing a guy who has a 6-7 inch reach advantage. It becomes a very difficult fight for them because it's difficult to get in the pocket, find the range, especially a guy like De Castro, who I would say is primarily a striker in terms of his punching and his kicks are probably two of his most prominent features that I've seen so far in his 6 career fights. But I'm not going to knock Greg Hardy at all, even though De Castro is my pick by decision. I do see this fight being a really bad one for Greg Hardy. Whether that's by decision, I can also see a very early knockout happening in this fight. I really don't see too many scenarios where Greg Hardy wins this fight. I don't really think he's a better striker. The one thing that you have to give him is he's a bigger guy. He's got a 6-inch reach advantage. He's got 4 inches in terms of his height advantage. So I do think you can give Greg Hardy a little bit of an advantage there. He's got great wrestling, but again, Yorgan De Castro, pretty good wrestler. I don't know what his background is in wrestling. Obviously, Greg Hardy's very new, and the UFC's trying to push him, in bigger fights, big name fights. His most recent fight coming against his second most recent fight coming against Ben Sassoli, where he was no contested for using an asthma pump. Now, here's the interesting thing. Greg Hardy came out and said that he doesn't really feel comfortable doing this fight based on his asthma. Now, this is really interesting for me, as he seems very concerned about his safety, and when you're very concerned about your safety and what's going to happen to you entering in the octagon, and I've listened to Joe Rogan and Chael Sonnen speak about this on countless times, it's really not good. It doesn't usually turn out well for that fighter. So Greg Hardy's also coming off a loss, I want to say, to Alexander Volkov, who is certainly a very solid heavyweight fighter. I just don't see him putting this one together. I have Yorgan De Castro clearly winning this fight. And I think this is a big fight for both these guys. This is going to kind of launch them into that conversation and into those category of fights where you're going to be fighting some of the guys kind of in the 3 to 7 range in terms of rankings in the heavyweight division. The next fight on the main card, this one could be an absolute banger. This could be a card that is certainly would be in talks for fight of the night, maybe even fight of the year. You have Jeremy Stephens, in my opinion, one of the toughest guys in the UFC, up against Calvin Kattar. Now, here's the interesting thing to note. Both of these gentlemen are coming off losses. Stephens, I believe, his last loss was to Yair Rodriguez in a rescheduled fight, which went the distance. Both of them fought, both Yair and Jeremy Stephens fought an incredible fight. And Yair's, one of the top contenders at 145. Calvin coming off a loss, I want to say in December, to Zabit Magomed Sharapov. Hopefully I didn't butcher his name too much. And also, I believe Stephens, I want to say 2 or 3 fights ago, fought Zabit and lost. So both these guys have lost to Zabit, who is a top contender at 145. Calvin Kattar is the longer guy. He has a 3-inch height advantage, and he has a 1-inch reach advantage. I don't see height coming into play too much here. Both of these men are brutally tough. Both of these men will stand up and strike, and they have no issue doing that. I think this is a very interesting fight. Forgot to switch to the next slide, sorry. Get that going. So again, both fighters coming off losses to top-rank featherweight contenders. I do see Stephens winning this fight in thrilling fashion in the 3rd round via knockout. I think that the most probable outcome of this fight is one of these guys knocking out each other. If this fight does go to a decision, though, we've seen Little Heathen, a.k.a. Little Heathen, Jeremy Stephens, go on these little runs in fights where he will try and dominate the fight, and it doesn't always look like he's trying to control the fight. Now, I think Calvin Kattar does a better job of that in terms of controlling the fights, and I think that's where I would see him winning, is taking it to a decision. But I just see Jeremy Stephens being a little bit too much. I think he has more power than Calvin Kattar, so I do see him winning that fight via knockout in the 3rd round. The next fight that I would like to highlight is, again, this fight has the potential to be everything. In my opinion, this fight should be for the interim heavyweight belt. Stipe Miocic, he's occupied right now. He's a first responder. I believe he is a firefighter, and he also is a first. He doesn't just serve as a firefighter. I don't know if he does other work as working in health, whether that's working in an ambulance and attending fire scenes and getting people out of bad situations. Sorry to get sidetracked, but he's very occupied right now. I wouldn't want him to step into a fight right now. He's not able to train. Ohio is still in lockdown, I believe, until mid-May or end of May. So he's not going to be able to train until at least then. He's going to look for at least 2 to 3 months of a fight camp. So we're not going to see that fight probably until July or August, realistically, with Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic, which is why I think this fight should be for the interim belt, because we might not see that fight even occur until 2021 between Stipe and DC. But we have, in my opinion, 2 of the top 5 guys in the heavyweight division. I would throw Curtis Razor Blades into that conversation as well. But focusing on this fight, you have Francis Ngannou, who might be the toughest guy on planet Earth. I don't think many people would try and disagree with me. He's got pretty good wrestling, he's a pretty good grappler, and he's got some massive power. Now, this is not to deny the man who we call the Predator versus the man who we call Biggie Boy. Jairzinho Rozenstruik is massive, as is Francis Ngannou. For a guy as big as he is, he's got pretty good cardio too. And how I would reference that is via his 5th round knockout against Alistair Overeem last year. He's a brutal guy. He's a great striker. He's got good kicks, as does Ngannou. He's got great punching, great KO power, as do most heavyweights. But I do think he is kind of among the top in that division for power. I think we might be looking at, in terms of KO power, probably the 2 best guys in the division. They just throw bombs. Either one of these fighters, even if this is not a fight for the interim belt, one of these two guys is going to be fighting the winner of DC or Stipe if it happens. And if that fight doesn't happen and one of those guys is not able to fight, and we see maybe an interim belt of a fight in August between the winner of this fight and DC, if that doesn't happen, it'll be one of these guys fighting Stipe for the belt. When that is, I don't know. I think this is a little bit of a disadvantage to see this fight not be an interim fight for the belt for Rozenstruik. Because Rozenstruik, we've seen his 5th round knockout. We've seen he has that cardio into deep rounds. Not to say that Ngannou doesn't. Ngannou might be not only one of the biggest beasts and one of the toughest guys in the UFC, but one of the most durable guys in the UFC, and probably one of the most athletic guys. He's got pretty good cardio. He's in extremely good shape. I just don't see. I don't see an early finish for Rozenstruik. I see Ngannou getting this done in the 1st or 2nd round by knockout. I officially have the 2nd round in my prediction. If Jairzinho is to win this fight, I don't think it's going to be on the cards. I think that Ngannou's going to be able to control this fight. Rozenstruik is going to have to push for another finish like he did against Overeem, and I don't really think he was winning that fight against Overeem. If that would have gone to decision, Rozenstruik would have lost, and then we could see somebody else fighting Ngannou right now. But I'm not going to speak down against Rozenstruik. He is undefeated, and Ngannou is certainly one of the top guys in the UFC at any division. That's why I'm going to stick with my pick of Ngannou. Now, on to the main fights on the main card, the 2 main fights. Switch here. I don't need to really explain too much about this to hardcore UFC fans. Some new UFC fans might not understand who Dominick Cruz is. He's the 135 greatest of all time in the UFC, in my opinion, potentially even in MMA history. He's held belts in the WEC before they merged with the UFC, and he was the first bantamweight champion, 135 champion of the UFC, and the last of the WEC. He's only lost 2 career fights. Those coming to Uriah Faber being one of the early fights in his career. I can't really say too much wrong about him. One of his most recent performances against Cody Garbrandt didn't go too well. Cody was extremely sharp. Cody put on, as good of a performance as you can put on, and Dominick Cruz was still very good in that fight, even though it looked, that kind of Garbrandt dominated the fight. It still went to decision. Dominick's a tremendous fighter. Now, obviously, Henry's a tremendous fighter. Both of these guys are 2 of my favorite fighters in the UFC, period. This might be, the most exciting fight for me, as is Tony and Gaethje. But Henry Cejudo, he's called triple champion for a reason. He's the former flyweight champ. He's the last guy to hold the 125 belt as it's currently vacant. He's the current bantamweight champion, and he's an Olympic champion in wrestling. He's one of the best wrestlers in the UFC. He's one of the best strikers in the UFC. He's pretty good at in terms of his grappling, obviously, as he's a good wrestler. This is a very difficult fight to pick, and this is a legacy fight. If Henry Cejudo is able to beat Dominick Cruz, he's beaten the greatest 125 fighter of all time in Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, DJ, and he will have beaten Dominick Cruz if he's able to get it done, the greatest 135er of all time. And then he's looking to move up to 145 and fight Volkanovski. And although Volkanovski is going to be superior in terms of his width, being a guy that Volkanovski used to play rugby and was a 200-pounder at 5'6", not many people can say that. But Henry is 5'4", and he's only 2 inches smaller. And he's certainly the better wrestler, so we'll see if that happens. This is a big narrative fight for both of these guys. If Dominick is able to beat Henry, he's beaten DJ, I'm pretty sure. He's beaten Uriah Faber, who's one of the greatest 135ers of all time, and he's beaten Henry Cejudo, who is the greatest fighter to fight at both 125 and 135 collectively. DJ didn't have as much success at 135, so and never held the belts 125 and 135 simultaneously. as did Henry Cejudo. I don't know too much about Dominic Cruz's jiu-jitsu. He's a very good wrestler in terms of his defense, but Henry's just the better wrestler. In my opinion, Henry's the better striker. He's got tremendous low kicks, and he's got tremendous striking. Although Dominic Cruz, I believe, is a little bit taller, he's got a 4-inch height advantage and a 4-inch reach advantage. I don't see this being too much of a problem for Henry, but it is fair to note that Dominic's movement and footwork is some of the best in the UFC, and it'll be interesting. Many people are doubting Henry and being able to keep up with Dominic's speed and Dominic's agility. It's going to be very difficult. I see this fight going to decision. I see Henry winning this fight. I don't see this fight being a knockout, so if you are going to bet on this fight being a knockout, I highly doubt that's going to happen. But again, Dominic Cruz is looking for his third title run. Henry Cejudo is looking to solidify himself as both one of the greatest 125ers and 135ers of all time. This is a big fight for both gentlemen, and it'll be interesting to see how Dominic comes out. Again, Dominic hasn't fought in, 3 or 4 years now? I mean, that's a long time ago, at least 2 years. So this is going to be a very tough fight for Dominic, and it could also be a very tough fight for Henry. I think this might be single-handedly the toughest fight to predict on the card. I would stay away from this if I were a bettor, but if you were to bet, I think the safe bet here is Henry Cejudo by decision. And the last fight on the main card, as we know, I'm just going to switch the slide here, is Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje. This might be one of the baddest fights that have ever been assembled. You have two of the baddest guys on the planet. I don't think you have two badder guys at 155. Obviously not to insult Khabib. Khabib is a mauler. But in terms of their complete arsenals of attack, I don't know if there's two badder guys. And I'm not disrespecting Khabib. That's just how good these guys are. And I'm saying that for the people that are discouraged that Khabib is not fighting against Tony anymore, just to highlight how good these two guys are and how good Justin Gaethje is. Tony Ferguson's going to have a little bit of a reach advantage here. I believe Tony is going to have a 5-inch reach advantage. I want to say 76 inches. I'm just going to check this out. 76 and a half. So he has 6.5 reach advantage, which I honestly don't think is going to come too much into play. The reason why I say that is because Justin is a ball of fire. Justin will push forward, and he won't care about his opponent's reach. He will try and get in there. He will try and throw bombs. I don't see Tony counter-striking and kind of knocking Justin out. I see Tony taking this fight to the ground, and I see Tony winning by submission in the third and 3 of 5 rounds. And in this case, I believe Tony's going to win, and Tony will be a 2-time interim champion. I think the UFC and MMA world is kind of shocked by that. But not to discredit Justin Gaethje and what he's done to get to this point, he's only lost 2 fights in his career, one being against former Bellator and UFC champion at 155, Eddie Alvarez, who is, maybe had a tough performance against McGregor, but is still one of the best 155ers of all time, and losing against Dustin Poirier, who then went on to fight Khabib for the 155 belt. So Justin is no slouch, and if you're disappointed that Khabib and Tony are not fighting, you can join me in that group. But if there's one fighter that could come in and step up and fill those shoes, it would be Justin Gaethje. Because frankly, I believe that next to Khabib, these are the 2 best guys at 155. I think McGregor's behind them. And although McGregor's an exciting fight, I think Tony and Justin would beat him right now. This is why I think this is the match to make. So thank you, Dana White, for doing that. But it's going to be an awesome one. Again, this along with the Nico Price and Luque fight, and along with Jeremy Stevens and Calvin Kattar, these are going to be, all 3 fights are going to be, one of those 3 is going to be fight of the night. I don't think anybody's going to deny that, and I think all 3 are going to be in the conversation for fight of the year, and probably some of the best fights we see all year, depending on how many more cards come out, but at least 2 of these fights are going to be in terms of that talk of fight of the year, and I think probably 3 of them. So let me know what you think of my picks. I just think Tony's just a badass dude. I think he's going to get it done. But yeah, let me know what you think of my picks. Hopefully they turn out well for those who are betting. I know some people are going to be relying on me, so I hope not to let you down too much. But if there is one fight, if you're watching this video, and there is one fight that you're going to watch all year, because I don't think Khabib is going to fight Tony by the end of 2019. I don't think Khabib is going to fight... I don't think he's going to fight anybody before the end of 2019. I probably don't see him doing so. He said he is Ramadan. He's now available in July. Before he said he was available in September. I think he's a big-time question mark. I don't think he's looking to fight anybody this year. And if it is somebody, it'll probably be McGregor. So I think if there's one fight that you're going to watch this year, even if Conor and Khabib were to rematch, I see Khabib winning that fight. And I think this fight would be better than that fight. So please watch this fight. Please watch this fight. And reach out to me if you have any more questions, any comments, things you think I got wrong.